Hi, for this episode we're going to take a slightly different approach. We're not going to be looking at groups of bikes or anything like that, we're just going to look at one particular element, which in this case is going to be JAP's or JAP's overhead valve V-twin engines. Now JAP was founded in 1895 by J A Prestwich. He moved his factory to Tottenham in 1896 and in 1903 he built his first motorcycle engine, with his first V-twin engine following in 1904. In the early 20s they introduced his first overhead valve engine. This was the KTOR, K-T-O-R. I'm going to use an abbreviation for each one of these just to move things along a little bit. Now the KTOR ran roughly square dimensions of around 85.7 by 85 to produce a 998cc V-twin engine. The engine was of course overhead valve, used a total loss oil system and had exposed valve gear. We first see this engine in use by Brough in the SS100 of 1924. In 1928 they introduced a version with enclosed valve gear. This was called the JTOR. Now the JTOR was slightly different, it runs a slightly longer stroke, a 99 by 80 stroke, and is able to rev a little bit better and produces 50 horsepower instead of the 45 horsepower of the earlier KTOR engines. There was of course a competitions version of this engine, and this was called the JTOS, also known as the 880. And it was this series of motors that you see setting land speed records for motorcycles during the 1920s and into the 1930s. The first speed demon of this era was Bert Levac. He set a record in Opagnon, France in 1923 of 118.9 miles an hour. And in 1928 Oliver Baldwin would be the record on again with a KTOR powered Zenith. George Brough of course was not pleased about this at all, so he immediately set about trying to snatch the record back and would himself ride in 1930 to set a new record. But George Brough didn't hold the record for very long, because the same year Joe Wright set a record in his OHV supercharged bike of 137.8. And it was at this point that the Germans entered the fray and moved the record on again. However, Joe Wright would strike back again and set another record of just over 150 miles an hour in Ireland. Now, record books will tell you that this record was set with an OEC, but it's not actually true. It was actually set using a Zenith. Zenith unfortunately gone out of business by then, but it was the spare bike that had problems with the OEC, so they used the Zenith to set the record. But there was one last great speed demon for Brough Superior and the JAP V-twins, and that was Eric Ferneyhoff. In 1936 he set a record in Gijón, Hungary of 163.8 miles an hour. Again the Germans would strike back with a supercharged BMW. In 1938 Ferneyhoff returned to Gijón in an attempt to reclaim his record, but unfortunately he would be tragically killed in an accident of over 175 miles an hour. Back on road bikes now, in 1934 we see the introduction of Brough Superior's Alpine Grand Sports model. This used an engine in a very high state of tune known as the 875, 75 in this case standing for, well, actually 74 horsepower at 6,200 rpm. This was a lot of power from a machine at this period, in fact an astronomical figure, making it truly one of the fastest bikes in the world, if not the fastest. But of course this was really pushing the limits of the chassis and brake technology, and also the limits of machine technology too, because this was not the most reliable engine for use on a road bike. This engine is sometimes called two of everything because it has two magnetos, two oil pumps and even two carburetors. Of course for the 1930s this meant that the bike was a little bit fiddly and quite fussy to keep in tune. But it was very powerful, and is perhaps a very fitting way for JAP or JAP to end their association with Brough Superior.